Hey everybody, Brett from AstartesGaming here, back with another Mount Blade 2 Bannerlord developer blog video. Today we're looking at part 2 of their coverage on the Calradian Empire, which is the developer blog for February 15th, 2018. And so in this blog they promised to give us a little bit more of the actual gameplay mechanics and representation of this faction, whereas the last blog was more the lore behind it. So let's go ahead and dive on in. Greetings, warriors of Calradia. Last week we had a look at the politics, history, and personalities of the three Imperial factions. Now we'll see how they'll be represented in game. Militarily, the Empire's troop types and equipment is drawn from the 9th to 11th centuries, a period of Byzantine resurgence. The Byzantines' best known troops are their cataphracts, fully armored cavalry who rode into battle with an arsenal of lance, saber, and long-handled mace. But the Byzantines also had a full complement of medium and light cavalry, plus spearmen and skirmishers, not to mention whatever mercenaries they could get. They were masters of combined arms, authors of military manuals like the Strategicon that counseled patience over glory-seeking, pioneers of a more scientific approach to warfare. And we get a screenshot of them fighting what looks like might be some Battanians or Volandians. But we do see some of their heavy cavalry there using the, I believe those are Kontos spears to like thrust down into the enemy infantry. So the Empire will also deploy powerful heavy cavalry, sturdy spearmen, and skirmishers, and our upgraded command system should give players a chance to experiment with combined arms. Improvements to the morale calculations, such as shock effect and taking down a large amount of troops at once, can make tactics such as flank charges more effective. Imperial cataphracts are also designed for opportunistic attacks that benefit from being timed more carefully than the Volandian steamroller. We've given them two-handed Kontos lances, a slight anachronism, I pronounced that wrong, anachronism, as these are more late ancient than early medieval weapons, but we think it will add interesting variety. Without the shield, a frontal charge by cataphracts might more easily be disrupted by missile fire, but if the enemy doesn't have supporting missile troops, then the extra reach of the Kontos can be devastating. Their heavy maces, swung from a fast-moving horse, can also deliver a crushing blow. As with the Romans, the Empire is assumed to have imposed a form of Pax Calradica, at least on its heartland, if not the ever-embattled frontiers. Peace and stability has allowed cities to grow, so the Empire is assumed to be slightly more developed than the Outer Kingdoms. In Bannerlord, we've introduced a number of new ways to show this kind of accumulated investment. We can vary a city's economic muscle with the amount of workshops it has, and its defensive might is shown by outer walls that can be one of 3 levels with different scenes for each. So that's really cool. As a city gets more and more developed, it can actually improve its defensive abilities, and this is actually represented in the siege battle scene. So that's cool. That means potentially any fief could have like up to 4 different battle scenes, because we know that fiefs can have no walls. They can also, well, I don't know if you would fight a siege in that case. Then it would probably just get raided. I'm not sure, because they haven't really discussed that. But as we know, fiefs are all essentially the same now. There isn't 3 levels like in Warband. They all start equal, and then some will obviously be more upgraded than others. But they can have, no walls, level 1 walls, level 2 walls, or level 3 walls. And so presumably they would have up to 4 battle scenes when they get attacked. And I guess in Warband, villages do have battle scenes. There are, bandit fights and stuff that you can do in them. But generally, if an organized army attacks them, it's not fought. Although it can be. If you attack an enemy near your village, you do actually fight in the village. So, yeah, I suppose that's still true in Warband. But that's really cool that you can upgrade the level of the walls, so you can have, like, poorly defended castles versus very well defended castles. if you have a castle that's in a very strategic location, you're going to want to upgrade that more than something that's, you know, probably going to get taken out anyways. Yeah, that's fantastic. And they can also vary the number of workshops. I don't know what exactly they mean by that. I would assume they're just referring to the fact that like some places may have more workshops built up initially than others. But I would assume that all fiefs have the potential for the same amount of workshops given enough investment from their owner. I don't think they're saying that some, like the places held by the Empire now have more workshop slots available than somebody else's. I think they just mean that more of those are initially taken advantage of than the others, but they're all equal in number, just not all used. And here we get a screenshot of the interior of a building. They don't tell us where this is, but maybe it is, maybe it's the Emperor's, well, there's no true Emperor now, but one of the people vying to be Emperor, maybe their courtroom, or not courtroom, their, I can't think of the word, but where they hold court. That's what I meant to say. Anyways, as in all the realms of Calradia, regional variation throughout the Empire will be shown largely through minor factions. Imperial border areas tend to be rougher and more chaotic than the Heartland, and in the game are represented by frontiersmen. Though fiercely loyal to the Empire, they adopt many of the ways of the warrior tribes they face, from weaponry to a preference for blood feud over courts of law. The Watchers in the northern hill country represent the Akriti, the famous Byzantine borders of Anatolia. So it seems like they're trying to pull sort of like from the late Western Roman Empire a little bit here. Some of the influences that they seem to be drawing from are sort of like the Federati and the Limitani, which were like the tribespeople that, well, the former being like tribespeople that settled within the Roman borders and were basically levied into the armies, and then the Limitani being Roman soldiers that were basically settled on the frontiers, and so they were basically like farmers. They had their own little bit of land on the edge of the empire that they farmed and stuff, but they were also like sentries to help, you know, protect the borders. And the Limitani were essentially there as like a first line of defense, and then the Comitatensis, you know, legions would come to support them if they were attacked. But they sort of, you know, stayed mobile, where the Limitani were, you know, like station guards, but they were also farmers. Anyways, in the south and east, colonies of fugitives and free-spirited wanderers have learned to live and ride like the steppe peoples they fight, forming the Eleftheroi. These are based on the Cossacks, third Rome rather than second, admittedly, but probably not much different than those who guarded the Byzantines' Black Sea frontiers. By Third Rome, they're referring to the Holy Roman Empire, I assume. And of course, we have a faction based on the Varangians, the fearsome Nord guardsmen of the Emperor, who in the tumult after Arenicus' death have formed a mercenary outfit. Interesting. Okay, so there's like a minor faction based on like a Varangian guard that's sort of beholden to nobody. Kind of cool. Alright, so an adventurer may make his or her name in the Outer Kingdoms, but rise to the pinnacle of power in the game. But to rise to the pinnacle of power in the game, a player will need to eventually deal in one way or another with the Empire and its legacy. You may be an Attila who humbles it, a Justinian who restores it, or a Charlemagne who remakes it in a new form in a new land. Don the purple robe or trample it into the dust under the hooves of your horse, that is your choice. And then here we have some nice concept art. In next week's blog, we will be speaking to one of the programmers from our engine team, Gokhan Urus. If you have any questions, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So before we end this, I wanted to address a few things. First, they give you like a few ways that you might deal with the Empire here. So obviously you could destroy it, you could restore it, or you could remake it somewhere else. But they don't really say how you would go about that. A lot of the questions I got on the, or at least that were posed on the last video, the first one covering the Empire, were along similar lines of, like, can we rise to the top of the Empire from within it, or any other faction? Because, as you guys well know within Warband, you couldn't do that. You could rise to, like, essentially the second highest person in a faction that already existed, whether it was, you know, a faction that was already around and you became the favorite for a marshal through, you know, renown and honor and all that, or you could support a claimant, in which case you were sort of the de facto marshal and you made a lot of the decisions for the claimant until the faction was established, in which case you kind of became what I mentioned for the established factions. So neither of those allow you to actually become the faction leader. You're just a very prominent lord within that faction. And I think a lot of people are hoping in Bannerlord to have the ability to, say, join the Volandians and eventually become the Volandian king without having to strike out on your own, start a new faction, and conquer the Volandians and just sort of call yourself the Volandians in name, or supporting a claimant and doing essentially the same thing but for somebody else. So I hope that that is an addition here, but they did not address it at all, which is a shame because they did tell us that there was going to be new mechanics to better represent the Empire in Bannerlord, but they didn't really tell us about any new mechanics in here, other than, you know, the walls being upgradable and variable amounts of workshops. But yeah, I would like to, you know, generally know the answer to this, because it would be really cool to be able to work your way up from within the Empire. As, you know, they mention Justinian, it's not like he started his own empire and just sort of, you know, absorbed the Byzantines. He was Byzantine. And so it would be cool to be able to be a Calradian lord, work your way up, and eventually become emperor, or at least one of, like, the three emperors vying to become the actual emperor, and restore it that way, rather than, again, having to essentially conquer it and declare yourself emperor. Not that that's not realistic, but it would be cool to have more options. Obviously, the reference to Charlemagne is more what we're talking about, because, of course, he was Frankish and eventually, you know, conquered enough land and got enough attention from the Pope to basically be declared emperor of, like, a reformed Western Roman Empire. And at that point, the West and East had split, and so they called it the Holy Roman Empire, because the Byzantines were sort of being left out at that point. And that was, like, more of a religious thing than anything. Is there anything else? I don't know. I mean, again, there's a few things I wish they would have discussed that they sort of didn't. They gave us more... I mean, they told us a lot about the minor factions in here. Some of them are actually really interesting. But that doesn't... We don't even really know how minor factions work in Bannerlord. So until they tell us that, it's really hard to say what exactly this means. They may just be little parties of essentially bandits loyal to a faction running around. They may not have any effect on the game other than a greater variety of enemies, for all we know. But maybe you can join the minor factions. They haven't told us. So that would be very interesting if you could do that. I would certainly like the opportunity to, but we don't know yet. Is there anything else? Anything else? Again, I'd like them to elaborate more on what this stuff means regarding certain places being more built up than others. My assumption, again, was that every fief is inherently equal at the beginning and some are just more upgraded than others. But what they could be saying, we can't rule this out because they weren't specific enough. They might be saying that some fiefs are just inherently better than others. They have more workshop slots, essentially. But I don't think that's the case. I think that would be bad gameplay mechanics if that were true. I think they'll have the same number of slots regardless of what fief it is, and some will just have more workshops built in those slots, or more upgraded workshops. But eventually, if you were to get even the worst fief in the game, you could make it the best, because that would be a good gameplay mechanic. Obviously, it gives you incentive to invest in that place, because otherwise you would only ever want to get the best fiefs and just upgrade them further. Anything else would be inefficient and a waste of your time. But we'll see. And I think that's pretty much it. I don't know that there's really anything else to take from this one. I was hoping for a little bit more. We did get some interesting information though, but there's obviously a lot of things, even with what they gave us, that they didn't quite clarify. So hopefully we will find out about that soon. Next week, it looks like we're going to be hearing about the engine. I don't know what exactly they could tell us about that would give us some interesting gameplay information, but we'll certainly find out. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a great time talking about some Bannerlord with you, and I look forward to seeing you guys back here for next week's vlog.